Hello and welcome to round 4, match 1 of my 7-point Highlander Australian Highlander League. This is my opponent for this round, playing a Grixis pile, his words not mine. Kind of interesting that as soon as I switch my deck up, my opponents all start playing more mid-rangey decks and less of the combo stuff. But anyway, let's have a look through and see what they're working with. Starting off with the lands, pretty standard. Grixis. Land base with a little bit of a green bayou here, tropical, and some green fetches for this Deathrite Shaman activation. Couple of islands and a swamp as the basics, no mountain. And we've also got a creeping tar pit here as the non-fetch shock dual lands. Alright, into the meat of the deck. There's a lot of cheap card draw here. Most important to note, Ancestral. So there's a big point sink to have Ancestral in the deck, but it's the best at what it does, and as far as cards from Mana goes, it's probably the best cantrip out there. Lots of other cantrips though, full suite of absolutely everything you can think of: Probe, Storm, Brainstorm, Mental Note, Ponder, Preordain, Thought Scour, and then Gush as well for free. So lots of cheap card draw and cantrips. To go with these is some value creatures, a whole stack of them. There's your bulk standard, expected Grixis creatures really. Nothing too out of the ordinary. JVP, Snappy, another point. Arcanist, Young Pyro, Baleful Strix, Click, and then Brazen Borrower and Bone Crusher Giant also, kind of counting as spells in here. Spellseeker for that Ancestral, so you can't, not just running that pure Ancestral, so there's another point for you there, so that's your 7 points. Hull Breacher, Deathrite Shaman like we talked about, and the Sedgemoor Witch as a ghetto young pyromancer up in here. Certainly a good card. Definitely seeing play in Legacy, so it's I'm expecting it to be good here as well. So off the cheap value creatures, we have the large stack of interactive spells here. K Command, very strong card. Bolt, you've got your hand attack with Thoughtseize and Inquisition. A bit of removal and Fatal Push, Collective Brutality also doing the hand attack thing, and Illuminate. Hindra also doing the hand attack, and Cling to Dust being good against the graveyard decks, and it cycles if it's not against graveyard decks, so it's definitely a strong card to have in the main board. Onto the counter spells, again a full suite. Forces, Spell Snare, Mental Misstep, Drown in the Lock, also doubling as a kill spell. Counterspell himself, Mana Leak, and Evasive Action, because you can get the forest off the bayou and the tropical, so it can be a Mana Leak for 4. And then finally rounding it out is the 3 Delve creatures: Ethereal Forager, Tessica, and Gurmag Angler, the 3 big boys, recurring a bit of value with the Forager and Tessica, and being a 5/5 for 1 in Gurmag Angler. So it's a pretty streamlined main deck here. It is looking to be pretty aggressive with these creatures and these spells. A little bit more aggressive than my first Rogue mid-range deck. So it's honestly probably not a great matchup for what we've got for this round. But we've got the kill spells, we've got the planeswalkers, we've got the removal, the wipes, and the counters, so we'll see how we go, I guess. Sideboarding for them, they have the standard 4 blasts and a duress as well, against the counter decks and the red decks. Aether Gust against the green and red decks. Null Rod and a Braid for artifacts, and a Braid also doing double duty to creatures, and then Chasm for the weenie decks. Oppo Agent against all the fetches, Deluge for the aggressive mirror, and then two lilies for a bit of late game recursion, and then the Ashiok for the graveyard decks, and then finally a Kalitas. If you're going up against all those creature decks, you might want to bring in a Kalitas, especially against like grave crawlers and whatnot. Against me, I'm assuming that these red blasts are coming in, probably this duress as well. A braid may or may not, probably won't make it in actually. These planeswalkers may come in just to give some inevitability against me, and I guess they'll see if they want the creatures or not, depending on how aggressive they feel like being. Yeah, but it's gonna be a reasonably fair fight, it looks. I don't think it swings in my direction too well. I think it probably favours them being the aggressor here, especially if they can play a few Ancestrals. You know, they have the Snapcaster and the Jace to flash it back as well. So it's definitely possible that they either overwhelm me with the card advantage just from Ancestral, or, you know, get me on the ground with like a Sedgemoor Witch or a Young Pyro, or just even any of their value creatures with some hand attack and some counter magic to back it up. So if we switch just over to what I'm playing and have a look at my sideboard, against them, probably bringing in the Hydroblast, probably bringing in the Dovin's Veto, and the Doomscar also is looking pretty good. Submerge, probably not. They're not going to be going and get forests a whole lot of the time. Fractured Identity is probably a bit slow here. Court of Grace, they're going to be hitting me. We may even bring in a Timely, and Monastery Mentor might come in as well. As far as cards that aren't good, some of this, like cheap counter magic, the Spell Snare, is good. The cheap counter magic's good, but the more expensive stuff like this Mana Drain might not be good enough. Like this counter spell might just be too slow. These like Thoughtseize, not exactly where I want to be, but you know, we've got a decent setup. It might be cutting the Arena Rector and the Ugin plan because it's just too slow. But we'll see how fast they go in game one. I'm not too great a judge just based off looking at the deck list. So we'll see how fast game one goes, and if we feel like we can get off this Rector combo, we'll keep it in. But if not, we'll definitely take it out if it's too slow. Important to note that they do actually have the main board Cling to Dust, which can deal with the Rector. I don't think that they bring in any of the sideboard graveyard hate. Like, I mean, what do they have? Just Ashiok, really? Yeah, well, that doesn't stop it anyway. Yeah, so they do have this mainboard Cling to Dust, which is something to be aware of, but it's not super valuable if it's only good against the Rector, really. So, oh, that's the wrong one. If it's only against the Rector, it's pretty much the only thing it's good against. So, yeah, they'll probably keep it in, but it's just something to be aware of for game one. Alright, so that's the game plan, that's their plan, that's my plan, and we'll see if that can translate into the matches. So I will see you there. Hello and welcome to the gameplay. Now this is being recorded after the fact. I had a couple of late nights and so I was quite dreary. So my commentary wasn't too sharp and neither were my plays in this game. So after a whole day of work and a couple of late nights, my plays weren't so sharp. Keep that in mind. So we're here in game one. We're on the play. Sorry, on the play. Keepable opening 7. Play this Watery Grave tapped, and opponent leads with a Deathrite Shaman. We draw a Force of Will, which is nice. Play our Polluted Delta. Opponent just plays a Misty and holds up. We draw Bloodchief's Thirst here, which is great actually. So we'll play the Verdant, and decide to fire off the Blood Chiefs first on this Deathrite Shaman. Notably, they can get double blue here for a counterspell, but I also have double blue up myself for my own counterspell. So opponent thinks about whether they want to counter this and keep their Deathrite around, whether they want this value engine in the end, or whether they just want to let it go and save their counterspells for some bigger threats. They end up fetching, cracking their Misty Rainforest, getting a Volcanic Island, and then tapping their Deathrite Shaman to exile that Misty Rainforest to create a blue, and do in fact factual counterspell it. I decide to respond in kind, cracking both of my fetches, and I of course grab Tundra and then Underground Sea, and then fire back with my counterspell of my own to get that Deathrite Shaman off the board. Just a clean 2 for 2 there. Opponent plays a Creeping Tar Pit, the all-star of this matchup as you will see, and we draw a Preordain. We preordain here, see Ugin and Big Teferi on top of our library. Ugin's not really what we want, but that Teferi's looking pretty good. You know, one more land and we can just slam this Teferi and we have double force backup. So I decided to put the Teferi on top and draw it. Godless Shrine enters untapped because if they decide to attack with this Creeping Tar Pit, I will just Kaya's Guile it, and also it holds up a hardcast Force of Negation if we need it. Opponent, end of turn, decides to Mental Note themselves, and we see they mill their own Force of Negation and a Bone Crusher Giant, sorry. And then they cycle a Cling to Dust. They play a Flooded Strand and then just ship the turn back. And we draw an Arena Rector. Not really what we were hoping for. We were kind of hoping for a land here to just slam a Teferi into play, but hey, you can't win them all. So the question here now is, do I just slam this Erector onto the field, or do I keep holding up this Kaya's Guile and this Force of Negation? And I decide to keep up the interactive spells and not play this Erector out, seeing as how they have the Cling to Dust in their graveyard and we don't have any sack outlet for it yet. Opponent plays another fetch, Scalding Tarn here. Really slow playing this. Their deck is a lot slower, a lot grindier than I was expecting. And this is going to be quite a long matchup, and as you'll see, this was actually an hour 10 game that I'm running at double speed, so it should only come down to about 40 minutes. We draw a 5th land, but it's a Creeping Tar Pit of our own, so it comes into play tapped, still not the worst. It means that the Teferi is going to come down next turn, and again we decide not to play the Rector, holding up the Guile and the counterspells. Opponent cracks their Flooded Strand for an Underground Sea. Presumably to flash back this Cling to Dust. They flash back their Scalding Tarn to grab another duel. This one here is grabbing a Steam Vents tapped, that's right. And then opponent of us is choosing which cards to exile from their graveyard to this Cling to Dust. I believe they get rid of their lands and Deathrite Shaman and stuff like that, leaving the counterspell, that's right. So cycles that, just straight up draws them a card. Seems pretty good in this this heavy control matchup. And then draws into a Preordain for themselves, manipulating the top 2 cards of their library. We see how they scry. Here it is, scries 2, puts 2 on the bottom, so effectively a draw 2 for them there. And we do draw an island. I decide to just slam this Teferi here. I have the Force backup, so they would need 2 counters. And as you see, they do have 1 counter, which is, you know, a good start. They fire off a Mana Leak. And looking here, they could have a 2nd counter as well, but I decided to try fire off this Force, seeing that it's probably worth it to get this Teferi onto the field. And they let their Mana Leak get countered, and then let this Teferi stick. So I uptick my Teferi, and with the ability on the stack, they Petty Theft it back to my hand, which is fine. I still get the untap with the Teferi at the end of turn, and we draw Big Daddy Jace, the Boogeyman himself, which is a reasonably good draw. We're kind of a little bit choked on lands here. We need a little bit more card draw, so Jace kind of provides that if we need it. We untap our lands to hold up this Kaya's Guile, and opponent Collective Brutalities us, choosing the Instant and Sorcery mode only. So this basically forces us to fire off our Guile now. which isn't exactly what we wanted to do. We kind of wanted to hold it up for this creeping tar pit, but you do what you have to. So we exile the opponent's graveyard, namely getting rid of that Cling to Dust, so maybe our Arena Rector can get through later in the game, and make a 1/1 Spirit, since gaining their life is not too important at this point in the game. And there's nothing to edict away from them, so that's also a problem. So we draw Mana Drain, which is good and it's bad. Opponent has 2 evasive creatures that can come down on both the Brazen Borrower and the Creeping Tar Pit. So I just decide to play the Arena Rector out here and hold up this Mana Drain. They decide to drown a Locket, and I decide to counter back to try and stick this Arena Rector. In hindsight, maybe that was not correct, and maybe the Mana Drain was better spent trying to force through one of these Planeswalkers, although they have the Creeping Tar Pit to attack it anyway, so it's hard to say. Anyway, Mana Drain just acts as a counterspell there, because we get the Colorless in our second main, which we can't use it for, so I gain technically a misplay, I guess, not playing the Arena Rector in the second main. But it actually may have come down to it as well, because it might have allowed us to stick Teferi and Jace in the same turn, which could be useful. But alas, like I said, 2 late nights before working on uni assignments and then a whole day of work means that you get those misplays. Opponent plays Sedgemoor Witch, super sweet new card, the Ghetto Monastery Mentor, and we draw a Snapcaster. Snapcaster is quite a good draw here. It's really just a consideration of what we're going to do with it, because there's really quite a few things we can do with it. So we end up playing the Jace and brainstorming, and this is quite a hard decision to make. There's a lot of different options of what I can do, but this Brazen Borrower is... so the Brazen Borrower is unable to come down for the opponent, which means it can't swing in at Jace, which means it's just the Creeping Tar Pit which attacks Jace. And what I miss here is that Brazen Borrower is non-land, so actually Brazen Borrower can't bounce this Creeping Tar Pit, so I actually make my decision incorrectly here based on that. And I aimed to path the Sedgemoor Witch now and Brazen Borrower the Creeping Tar Pit, which was actually incorrect. What I should have done is kept the Jace around by pathing the Creeping Tar Pit, let them have a turn with the Sedgemoor Witch, and then I could snap back the snap back the swords next turn to get rid of the Sedgemoor Witch. They eliminate my blocker in response to me pathing their Sedgemoor Witch though, so they get a pest. Again, probably should have done this post-combat, missed a point of damage, but what are you going to do? In the end run, 2 points of damage or whatever, it wouldn't have really mattered. So here comes the Creeping Tar Pit to take out Jace. You see me here try and Brazen Borrower it, but reading the card explains the card, it says non-land. Again, I'm tired, you make these small mistakes. That one was a pretty big mistake actually, and we do in fact draw the Teferi. So the big Teferi comes down here. I'm still holding up this Brazen Borrower, but I don't really want to Brazen Borrow my opponent's Brazen Borrower, and we draw that Snapcaster Mage that we put there. Nothing really for it to do right now, but maybe in the future. Well, we untap our land, so I guess we can Swords. I would like to flashback this Kaya's Guile though, which means we need to get this pest off the board with this Brazen Borrow activation likely. Opponent untaps notably, and Hymn to Thorax us, which is a huge problem. This is quite a strong card. The good thing to note here is that they cannot activate Creeping Tar Pit, but they will be able to play the Brazen Borrower at the end of my turn next turn. So I have to decide here whether I want to bounce something and play out a Snapcaster Mage, whether I want to play out a Snapcaster Mage and flashback something and lose the Borrower, or whether I want to play the Borrower, lose a Snapcaster. And what I ultimately decide is that I'm going to snap back the Mana Drain. And I'm going to Mana Drain the Hymn to Thorax to keep my Brazen Borrower around. Ultimately, I don't know if this is correct, if this is better or worse than playing the Brazen Borrower out. It's really hard to say whether I should have bounced the pest there or not. We draw into Ponder. Ponder finds Mystic Sanctuary, Plains, and Mental Misstep. I like the Sanctuary because it deals with the Creeping Tarpet and it deals with the Brazen Burrower with Swords to Plowshares and or Kaya's Guile, using Brazen Burrower to bounce this pest. And I ultimately decide to put back the Plains, then the Mental Misstep, and then the Mystic Sanctuary, and I decide not to shuffle. I decide the Mystic Sanctuary is worth it to get back the Swords to Plowshares, which I can get off this Teferi. Again, I think, looking back, I probably should have shuffled in that position. Drawing the Mystic Sanctuary into Swords is probably not worth having 2 dead draws in Mental Misstep and a Plains following it. But yeah, especially when I Petty Theft the token to get it off the board, trying to force through a little bit more damage, and I guess this was also incorrect because it opens Teferi up, but then they Colligan's Command, which was a super sick play, and what they're doing here is killing their own pest, which fizzles my Petty Theft and making me discard. I decide not to Swords my own creature to gain 1 life. And then Petty Theft is countered, so I don't even get the Brazen Borrower, which is actually a huge problem because Brazen Borrower, my one, being able to block my opponent's Brazen Borrower is huge because it keeps Teferi alive. Opponent finally hits their 6 land drop, just drawing straight gas over here, and the Baleful Strix, just being another flyer that cycles, is huge. I note here that I should have attacked with my Creeping Tarpet last turn. If you're counting, I think that's 5 total damage I've missed now. I drew the Mental Misstep, which I knew was there. It's like, this is why it's coming back to haunt me. I draw the Plains, which I knew that was there, and I decide to activate my Creeping Tarpet this time and go swinging. Swing out with the team. If they want to trade with my Snapcaster, that's fine. But I need to start getting some damage through because my opponent's just got evasive threats in this Brazen Borrower and this Creeping Tarpet. And speaking of, the Brazen Borrower now comes down, which means that my Teferi is going to die to an attack by the Tarpet, Borrower, and Baleful Strix. So opponent cracks their fetch land, goes grabs a Badlands, and then activates the Tarpet to swing out at Teferi to kill him, which is a big problem because now I'm just drawing off the top of my deck against an opponent with 4 cards in hand and a board presence. And there's a Dreadhorde Arcanist, which can't actually flash anything back at the moment, but maybe later it'll be good. I draw Narset, which is pretty good, into 2 Teferis, and I decide to take the bigger of the Teferis, which I think is correct. Just getting this selection filtering through my deck to find the cards I need, because there's a lot of cards that I just do not need at this point in the game. For example, Library of Alexandria. I'm never getting back up to 7 cards in hand, so that's useless. Again, not swinging in because, you know, they just kill my Snapcaster and it's better as a blocker. And also it doesn't trade, so I just lose a Snapcaster Mage. There's no point in doing that. So that was a reasonably good turn for me as far as turns go with a Narset and a Teferi. The problem is that they're both just able to be killed here pretty much. They decide not to activate the Creeping Tarpet, indicating that they have a mana-intensive play in their hand. Either that or it was a mistake. And what they do is they swing 3 at Narset and 1 at Teferi, meaning that if I phase out the Brazen Borrower with the Teferi goes down, or Narset goes down. So I decide to let Narset go down, drawing and discarding. I draw Baleful Strix, which is a great draw here for me. Just being a flying blocker that also draws me a card is huge. It's exactly what I want in this position. So I let Narset go down, Teferi stays around, and then we get to find out what my opponent's mana-intensive play was, and it's a young Pyromancer, which is a problem. That can flood the board and get out of hand really fast, and we don't see what their other card is at this point. So we draw the Baleful Strix, sorry, we play the Baleful Strix after drawing a Hull Breacher into a Brainstorm. And Brainstorm's again a pretty good draw here. I fire off the Brainstorm into Night's Whisper, Opposition Agent, and Windswept Heath, which are not great. My life total is actually a little bit of a problem here. So this Night's Whisper and Windswept Heath are a little bit painful, but still not the worst thing in the world. Deciding what to put back, I put back the two stacks pieces. I kind of just need some plays here, and I decide to shock with a Hallowed Fountain, which maybe was wrong. I maybe could have not used the mana and just saved myself 2 life. But we draw Opposition Agent. I thought I'd put you back and shuffled, but anyway. I can swing in with a Tarpit here, or I can play the Opposition Agent, and I decide to swing in with a Tarpit. I figure racing here is my only bet, considering they have 2 flyers and an evasive threat, as well as this young Pyromancer going to swarm the board if it can get any chance. So I decide to hold up what is ultimately incorrect. I hold up a Tundra here instead of a Black Source, which was a mistake, because I still have Fatal Push in my deck, which, if I draw it off Teferi, means I can take out this Creeping Tarpit off this draw, and I've already used my Swords to Plowshares, and any 1 mana blue interaction is either sorcery speed or counter spells, which neither of those do me any good here, so I should have held up a black to Fatal Push. They play a Vendilion Clique, which, you know, the ETB is fine. My hand's bad, so that doesn't take anything, but more impressively, it's a 3/1 flyer that is just going to kill me. And here I'm thinking I'm actually just straight up dead on board, but I find my only line which actually allows me to stay in this game, and that is if the opponent swings with their 3 flying creatures and their Creeping Tarpit. I have to block one of the 3/1s with my Baleful Strix, phase out the Creeping Tarpit with my Teferi, take 4 damage. The opponent loses, for example, a Brazen Borrower for my Baleful Strix. And then on my next turn, I have to draw a board wipe, which is either in the form of Toxic Deluge, Supreme Verdict, or Ugin. And then I have to uptick and hit either Fatal Push or actually I think it might just be Fatal Push. 2, 4, 6, 8, or I think Eliminate also does it, off of my loot from Teferi for my turn and loot for Teferi for the opponent's turn. So I have 2 draw steps at hitting a board wipe, and then an additional draw step, and one of those 3 also has to be a black instant speed removal spell, and that is my only way out of this. And I did spot it, so I did have to play to it. And that is by Teferi phasing out the Creeping Tarpit. If I phased out any other creature, Supreme Verdict wouldn't kill that creature, and it would be able to kill me on the backswing. So I phase out the Tarpit, I block the Vendilion Clique, I take 4, I go to 3, and you know there's just a chance my opponent has a bolt here and kills me anyway. But you know, you have to play to your outs. So I do. Opponent also has 3 cards in hand, could very well be representing a counterspell, but I cannot play around it at that point. And I draw a Scalding Tarn. So this is it. I have to uptick to Fury and hit a board wipe. I have to, it's my only out, and I don't get there. I don't get there. I've gone through 40 cards in my deck, 39, 40 on my opponent's turn, and I did not find any of my 3 board wipes. And you know what? That's just magic. That's just how magic works. That's just how it happens. So, you know, game 1 down, and we lose it, and so we're on to sideboarding. And so that's okay. We were on the play before, we're on the play now, we kind of have a better feel about how their deck matches up against ours, and about how we are wanting to play this game. So I look at trying to bring in this Cling to Dust because we're going super late, and I look at bringing in this Doomscar because I really needed a board wipe in that situation. Like, that was the only way out, is if I had a board wipe. But then I kind of stop and I think, like, what am I taking out for these 2 cards? Because, you know, put them in, you take them out. And I realize I don't actually need this extra board wipe. I've got 3 in my deck and that's enough. I was just unlucky. And I don't really need this Cling to Dust. I've got enough late game cards anyway. So I decided to just run it back completely. I know we were on the play and lost, and now we're on the play again with the completely same deck, but I know the better game plan now. I know what my deck's trying to do. And so we keep a perfectly good hand, 3 lands, Brainstorm, Narset, and a Toxic Deluge, and a Counterspell. This is pretty much exactly what you want, and then the opponent Inquisitions. Good thing is we can fire off this Brainstorm to hide our 3s, and we have to decide which 2 3s we want to hide, whether it's which 2 of Narset, Toxic Deluge, and Force of Negation that we want to put back and hide. And by the way, this is a lot of lands. So I'm thinking, what is my turn's going to look like? And I'm going to put a Narset out on turn 3. I'm going to put a Teferi out on turn 4. And I want this Toxic Deluge as backup. So that means that the Force of Negation is actually my worst card here. So I put back the Toxic Deluge and the Narset. I let them take the Force of Negation, and that's the only legal target, so they do. Back on my turn, I draw the Toxic, and then play out my God of Shine tapped. Opponent fetches for a Volk, and holds up mana. I decide here whether it's worth running this Narset into a Counterspell, and decide that ultimately it is worth it because I have a follow-up turn 4 play anyway. So even if Narset gets countered, I would have a follow-up play. Whereas if I didn't play it this turn, I would get choked on mana and be playing a 3 on a 4 and a 4 on a 5. So I played the Narset. They thought Scour in response, so they get their draw. Hopefully trying to hit a counter, I guess. And Narset finds me a Swords to Plowshares. Again, removal is kind of key. Opponent here plays their own fetch, Polluted Delta, and cracks it for Badlands. The perfect trifecta of OG duels over there from the opponent. And this Narset's actually reasonably good against their deck. There's a lot of cantrips in there, and there's a lot of cards that draw, so I'm quite happy with this. And opponent plays the Young Pyromancer, followed by bolting the Narset. We draw a Thoughtseize, which is a fantastic draw, and now I have to decide whether I want a Teferi or whether I want a Thoughtseize. I decide I want a Thoughtseize, and I see they have Bone Crusher and Snapcaster in hand. I actually deliberate for a while here whether I can leave them with Snapcaster Mage, but just decide that actually I'm not going to present any Bone Crusher targets for a long time anyway, and the Snapcaster Mage is just going to be good value for them in the long run, so I do take it ultimately. And then looking at their hand, this forces me to run out my Toxic Deluge now, because otherwise they're just going to not play up their Bone Crusher because they don't need to. It's highly unlikely, and I'm trying to reduce the amount of life I lose here because I also have the swords for this Bone Crusher, which is going to cost me 2 life. So I do end up Toxic Deluging away the Young Pyromancer and the token, and then passing it back to my opponent. Opponent draws a Scalding Tarn for turn. They instantly crack it, which is seemingly wrong here. But they do run out this Naked Bone Crusher. We draw another land, although it's a fetch, and I'm deciding in which order I want to run these out, and because I also already have Tundra in play, but Bloodstained Mire can go grab a Scrubland, so it's fine. Loot with Teferi to find Inquisition, which is bad, but it's better than this land, and then we path the Bone Crusher. So now we just have a Teferi against an empty board from the opponent. Opponent, of course, draws Ancestral Recall, you know, the only card in their deck that can really get them out of this. And I uptick Teferi in response, which is completely incorrect. I should have saved that till the end of turn, because I draw Bloodchief's Thirst and discard this Inquisition, and they get to Taxing Probe me, so they know what I have in hand. And they just don't run out any creatures. Whereas if I had Inquisition still, and at end of turn I could have maybe sniped something with this Bloodchief's Thirst, or I could have kept Inquisition to Inquisition them. Anyway, now this Bloodchief's Thirst is bad, so I ditch it and play out this Jace, holding up this Counterspell for any problematic spells they might have played. Also good to note here that this Snapcaster Mage. Sorry, I'm glad I took the Snapcaster Mage over the Bonecrusher Giant for sure. Yeah, because having them draw another 3 in this position would have been super problematic for me. It's just something I couldn't keep up with. So opponent here is tanking for a little while on my end step. I'm not super sure what they're doing here. They did pass with all 3 mana up after seeing my Bloodchief Surge last turn, so I assume they have some creatures in hand. And then they go for a Colligon's Command, trying to kill my Jace and get back their Snapcaster so they can snap Ancestral. And there is no way I'm having that, so I snap off a counterspell in response. All the reasons I said I don't want them Snapcaster Ancestraling before all apply still. So that is the fastest counterspell of my life. Opponent here either draws or just has naturally in their hand a Brainstorm. They fire it off, and this is why I think the opponent shouldn't have cracked their fetch land for that Watery Grave on the Bonecrusher turn, because a fetch land here is so much more useful than having 2 life at this point. Like, my deck is not going to kill you through damage anytime soon, so being able to shuffle away those 2 cards is going to be huge. But they do find their Drown in the Loch to kill my Jace. I mill with Teferi, which is a Watery Grave, find a Ponder, play it, look at the top 3 and say, hey, that's pretty good. I decide not to shuffle, which I think is correct here, take a Teferi, try and play it, and I only have 4 lands on tap, so that's bad. I also stacked my deck incorrectly. That should have been a Cabal Therapy going into my graveyard because it was useless. Because if I needed to in a pinch, I could have discarded this Teferi to grab a Spell Snare off the top of my deck to counter a super problematic 2-drop. Anyway, we milled this Cabal Therapy anyway, so it didn't really matter. Draw a land, uptick the Teferi to find a Preordain. I decide whether or not to keep the Windswept Teeth or the Preordain. And I decide to keep the Preordain but not get greedy and just throw the big Teferi out there. Now opponent has the Force and snaps it off super fast because they will just lose to a big Teferi. Little Teferi is not super problematic, and if you notice here, Teferi is up to 10, so he can take me 2 extra turns, but opponent plays Opposition Agent. Now I decide to get greedy here with the medium Teferi, and instead of just taking the 2 extra turns now, I decide to uptick. Because if I take 2 extra turns, I have no prospects, there's nothing for me. And I draw a Kaya's Guile. So I preordain finding Marshflats and Baleful Strix. And this is the time I would like to point out that I do not play around Opposition Agent well. Not at all. So I play this Baleful Strix out here. I kept the Marshflats on top thinking it was good, thinking it was going to get me a land that I could crack for this Kaya's Guile to get rid of this Opposition Agent, completely forgetting that of course Marshflats will not find a land because they will find the land off Opposition Agent. This is important, remember this for later, and by later I mean like next turn. Wink. But I up to Teferi, get lucky, pull a Rector and discard this Marshflats, with my intent of playing Arena Rector next turn and finding an Ugin. Now, note, to play Arena Rector, also they eliminate my Baleful Strix, to play Arena Rector I need to phase out this Opposition Agent. I couldn't have held up double blue to mana drain this even if I wanted to, so I actually discard the mana drain here, because it's just worse than my other 2 cards. But anyway, the play here is to phase out Opposition Agent with Teferi, and then play the Rector and sack it. Instead, I uptick the Teferi, right? I discard this Kaya's Guile, play and crack the Verdant Catacombs. Remember, okay? I have had 2 late nights and a whole day of work, so cut me a little bit of slack here. Except then I play the Rector, sack it, and just throw the game away. Just like that. What are you doing? Past me, what are you doing? Come on, bro. You played the Verdant, cracked it, and saw they got a swamp. And then I just completely blanked, played the Rector out, and then sacked it, and they searched. They searched and got a Jace the Mind Sculptor, for those that were wondering. Not that it really matters, they could have got any damn Planeswalker and I would have lost here. But all I had to do was downtick the Teferi on the Opposition Agent and I win the game. And I just threw it away. I keep playing because, I mean, I guess there is some non-zero chance that I actually come back here. But they play my own Swamp, they play my own Jace, and they go from 1 card in hand up to 8 cards in hand in no time flat, and I'm stuck here trying to get some value out of this Teferi and this Knight's Whisper. But this is it. That was it. That's the game over. It was honestly two really good games of Magic. Really thought-intensive, thought-provoking games of Magic, trying to find the correct lines. And I made nuanced errors throughout the matches, and then I made one huge error right at the end there just to throw it all away. And it was seriously heartbreaking at that point. After playing like an hour and a bit, an hour and 10 of Magic straight, trying to calculate these lines against for 2 mid-range late game decks, trying to calculate the correct lines is a lot of computation, a lot of brain power, and like I said, cut me a little bit of slack here, running on low sleep, after a full day at night time. I'm supposed to be in bed now, but I was devastated with myself when I made this play. For those who don't know, I've been playing Magic for over a decade now. I started playing when I was 9 or 10 years old, something like that. And that right there is the largest, the biggest, the worst misplay that I have ever done in my over 10 years of playing Magic. I have not made a bigger misplay than that one, without a doubt. That, like, even as a kid, when you don't even know the rules, I haven't made a worse misplay than that. And that really sucks, because a game 3 would have been so interesting. You have 2 like super heavy control decks trying to grind each other out, and collectively we've got like 19 minutes on the clock. Like, it's going to be a lot of impulsive decisions, a lot of throwing cards around without thinking about it too much, and it's just going to be a really exciting control matchup. I would have been so excited to play this game 3. These first 2 games were so good, but I just couldn't compose myself. I couldn't hold it together, and after an hour and 10, I blanked and threw it away. And you know what? That happens sometimes. I was honestly devastated. I couldn't believe it. You saw the long pause there after opponent searched. I put my headset down and I had to walk away for a minute, because it was horrible. But yeah, I came back. You notice I'm not commentating air over the game, because opponent is basically taking game actions, and I am responding to those game actions. Because my opponent has won here. There's I think zero way I lose the game at this point in time. Is really nothing I could have done after punting that away, after being in such a commanding lead. And maybe I wouldn't even in won if I had phased out the opposition agent, because with I get Ugin, and then the opposition agent and Creeping Tarpit come swinging in at it anyway. It's likely I would have won, but you never know, especially with an opponent's deck being also heavy control. So yeah, that's about going to wrap it up here. You can see here the final moments of the game. I find a fatal push and a way to loop it a couple times, but it's just too late. And the Jace here bounces my opposition agent for the win. And opponent takes me down in 2-0 in what could have been an exciting 3-round game, but just wasn't. So opponent, I'd like to thank you for the games regardless. They were both fantastic games. The first one and the second one. In fact, before the punt, I think the second game was even better than the first one. I really actually enjoyed these games. I really enjoyed playing this deck. And I'm excited to play this deck some more. Hopefully with a little bit less mistakes, a little bit more sleep, but yes. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next match. Have a good one.